Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished marketer and professional from San Francisco, USA, Stephanie Moon. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me so much, Ash.
Thank you. Stephanie is a book marketing strategist. And as all of you know, I have written many books and I've always been very partial to authors. So, Stephanie, before we talk book marketing, tell me about your own journey in brief. And how did your childhood passion for reading shape your career in book marketing?
Oh my gosh. So I was one of those kids that read under the cover. We were always reading books, no Kindles, no iPhones, no iPads. I had a little flashlight and would pull the covers over and just read at night. So I grew up loving to read. And when I graduated, it was kind of during the tech boom. And since I live in San Francisco, there was a lot of jobs in tech. But for me, it felt like I don't even know what I'm marketing. I studied communication, and in tech, I didn't know what I would be marketing. It felt very ambiguous, right? Like, you're marketing Google, but I was like, Google is a search engine. Like, it didn't connect in my brain. And so I was lucky enough to find a job at a children's publisher and loved it so much, and then have stayed in publishing ever since.
Incredible, incredible. So, Stephanie, tell me, what are some of the common challenges you face when marketing a book?
Well, I think so. Some of my work right now is done with publishers and some with authors directly. And for the stuff with authors, I think that when authors, decide that they're going to write a book and get a book deal, they don't often think that they're going to have to be the one marketing.
Correct.
They think they're just going to write and that's it. And their publisher is going to market. But as you may have experienced, you have to do a lot of the marketing, right? You have to build an audience. You have to find people. You have to promote. You have to tell people about your book. And a lot of time authors don't do that, or they don't know how. And then they kind of really struggle with that idea of marketing their book.
Very well said. In fact, I remember when I published my first book in 2010 with Penguin, I just assumed I'd written this 130,000 word book. And I assume now my work was done. And I had this incredible shock when the publisher said, okay, now get out and market it.
Yes.
So I said, but I thought that's your job. He says, my job is only to publish. But
yes, it's so true. And I tell clients all the time, writing the book, the content, the research, your work is half the role of publishing. The other half is marketing and promotion. And it's like, I see, so I work with a lot of different authors, but I have lately been working with a lot of cookbook authors. And to write a cookbook is so much work: research, testing, groceries, photo shoots, right? And they spend years doing this. So they spend years in the content creation, and then they only want to market for like 3 weeks. I'm like, it's such a disproportionate amount of time. You spent 3 years creating, but you only want to market for 3 weeks. Like, that doesn't really make sense. And to me, it feels like, what about all that work you did before, right? Like, you put your heart and soul into it, but then selling it, you've just like fallen flat because you're burnt out, you're tired, or you don't know what to do. So that's where I come in and help authors, create the right strategy to get them where they want.
Great response. And therefore, your response is the right segue to my next question. What goes into marketing a book?
Oh my gosh, so much. It's finding an audience, knowing who they are, knowing why they want to read your book, knowing how to talk to them. I mean, all of that, like, excuse me, takes a long time. It's a time-consuming process, right? Telling them about your book and then asking them to buy your book. And aside from, writing the book, like, the finding your audience and being able to connect with them is like the next longest part of the process. I work with a lot of authors, and sometimes they're like, I don't want to like start marketing or promotion, or start like even looking for people to be a part of my community until my website is done. And I say, your website, I mean, you should have one, yes, but also that's not the most important thing. It's like many leaps before a reader goes from social media probably to your website, right?
Very well said. And you must have worked with so many authors and so many publishers.
Yes.
Why, in your view, do authors overlook the importance of marketing their own books?
Oh my, I think because if they're publishing with a publisher, they think the publisher is going to do it. But the publisher signed the deal with an author because they think that the author is going to do it. And so I think there's like a little miscommunication, but then also the author just doesn't feel like that's what they signed up for. I hear so many times, I'm a writer, not a marketer. I hear that like all the time when I'm talking to authors and clients. And I think it's just like a skill set that they haven't learned yet and didn't know that they needed to know.
Well said. When I was reading about you and preparing for this conversation, you have something called a Master Your Book Marketing Program.
Yes.
Tell me about this program, and then I'll ask you some more questions.
Yeah, so it's basically to understand marketing. So just like I was saying before, authors didn't know that they needed to market, right? And because of that, they don't know the foundations of marketing. And you need to know the basics to know what you're doing and then why you're doing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how does one enroll for your program?
So the best way is to contact me either on my website or on Instagram or LinkedIn or TikTok, because I have also found that there's like a kind of like a right fit for me, like type of client to work with, because I've worked at the publisher and know kind of like what's happening behind the scenes there. I like to work with people who have a book deal and also understand and are willing to do the work to market their book.
Well said. My next question, Stephanie, is that what are some of the current trends in book marketing that authors should be aware of?
Well, I don't know if this is so much a trend, but just want to definitely mention is that authors should have like an email newsletter. So, excuse me. So social media is important to get the word out about you, but you don't own those names, right? You could, if it's Facebook, Instagram, whatever, your account could be shut down any day and you would have no control over it. And all those people that you worked so hard to gain as followers are now lost because they have no other way to get to you, right? They don't know how to contact you. But if you have an email newsletter, you can they can get an email from you. And then I would say definitely in the US, what's really popular is Substack.
Okay.
Have you heard of Substack?
I beg your pardon?
Have you heard of Substack?
I have heard of Substack, yes.
So that is very popular and trendy right now. So publishers love to see like a very active Substack because, and I've seen it with my own clients, that Substack can really drive interest in sales because people who subscribe to the Substack, right, like really want to hear what you're doing. So would also be really interested in buying your book.
Very interesting. So I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Substack and reach out to Stephanie if you have any questions. My next question to you is, Stephanie, and I've often been asked this myself, how important is personal branding for authors to sell their books?
I think more and more important because your brand is kind of like who you are. Your book is more like one piece of the puzzle, right? And I also am a firm believer in a book is kind of like a launching off point, right? So for a lot of authors that I work with, they're using the book to get more speaking engagements, working on different projects, different partnerships, different collaborations, right? And that comes from the initial reach out is because you have a book, right? Your book is coming out, but it's really built on your brand because people want to work with not just an author, but somebody that has a brand and that stands for something, that aligns with their company or their project or their brand.
Okay. And the other question that I've often been asked, and I'm going to ask you, is how important is the cover of a book and book reviews in the process, in the marketing process?
Yeah, so I definitely think a book cover is important,
Mm.
especially if it's going to be at a bookstore, because you're competing against so much, right? You're
Mm.
competing against everything else in the bookstore. So you want a cover that catches somebody's eye. And I think one kind of like caveat is you want it to be kind of different, but not too different than what's in the genre. Because if you stand out too much, people's brain will have like a disconnect. They won't understand that this cover that looks like this belongs with these other ones if they're too different. It just is very hard for them to people's brains to understand that. And then reviews are important to have on places like Amazon or bookshop.org to kind of like give credibility to you, you know, like think about the last time you bought a book. Or when was the last time you bought a book that had no reviews, right? I don't know if I've ever done that. So reviews are really important to show that people have, one, bought your book, two, read it, and then three, had an opinion about it and then wanted to share it.
Well said. The other question that I've often debated with many authors is that they like to put their own face on the cover of the book. And I've said, listen, unless you're a Steve Jobs or a Bill Gates, why do you want to put your face on it? I'd love to get your perspective.
That is so funny. So I think if you are very famous or your audience, you have a very deep connection to your audience, I think putting your face is like, okay, is good because then they connect with that, right? Like Michelle Obama, of course, she should put her face on the cover of her book, right? But if you're like just starting out and this is like a very small deal at like a very small press, like people are not going to know who you are. And there will just be, I think, like a disconnect, like, between like the cover and then the book, because they're gonna be like, who is this person? Is this, I mean, probably the author, but like, why are they there? I would probably not suggest unless you're very famous.
Well said. My next question, Stephanie, is on technology. With so much technology, book marketing is changing, So how do you balance digital and traditional marketing methods for your books?
Well, I think it depends on what your goal is. So if you want to, for instance, like do more corporate speaking and have, events where you sell books in the back, that strategy is different than trying to sell all your books through social media. So I think it depends on the goal, but I think that what I have also found is that building relationships is probably like the best advice I could give an author. So building relationships with your peers, people in the industry, people in publishing, those relationships can get you very far, even if you have a smaller platform.
Okay. And, a few minutes back, we talked about social media. I'd like to ask you one more question in a little more detail. How important is social media in book marketing? And how does an author determine which social media or which sets of social media they should select?
Yeah, so I think that question of like which like social media app should I be on, right? And it's really about the author. So for instance, like if you love to be on video, you should be on something like TikTok or Instagram, something that makes it easy to share video. Like you want to pick the social media channel that you can show up the most on, because what's more important than the actual channel is like how authentically you can show up, how often you can show up, and how much content you can produce. So you have to find the one that feels right to you. And it might take a while for you to find that. So I think it's a little bit of like testing and then, tweaking, testing and then finding the right one. But then once you find it, just stay there and like stick to it.
Stay with it. Well said. And Stephanie, how do you approach budgeting for a book marketing campaign?
Do you mean from like the author's perspective or the publisher?
From the author's perspective.
Well, I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. So it depends on like did you get a big advance? Is your advance huge? And do you want to be, for instance, like writing books every other year? Or like, what's your goal, right? Because I think if you want to write books, more books in the future, you want your first book to sell, because it's very easy for a publisher to see how many books you've sold, right? And publishers want to give advances and place bets on people who are a known quantity, who have sold books. So if your idea for the long run is publishing more books, you want your first one to be a success. But then that said, also, your first book sometimes is like your first pancake, it's kind of like you're getting to know what publishing is like. You're kind of getting to get to know the landscape. And for the budget, I think it just depends on what's available to you. I have seen authors spend so much money on like a marketing agency, like $50,000 on a marketing agency, and they don't get much. But then I've also seen authors just do it themselves or hire just like one person part-time to help them, and they get so far. I think it depends on kind of really what you're looking for, but making sure who you hire can like deliver on what they said. Because I
love this example of take a part-time person, because for most authors, they don't make a lot of money on their books, and to upfront huge costs, because publishers have very limited budgets to market.
Yes. And I mean, unless publishers are publishing so many books, they definitely have like lead titles, right? Where they have to spend the most time and resources. So, all the other books that aren't the lead, they will unfortunately get less time and less money.
That's right. Correct. So, Stephanie, I have time for 2 more questions for you. My next question is, can you share an example of a particularly creative marketing campaign that you crafted?
Oh, yeah. So this is more like a brand building for a publisher that I worked with, and it was basically celebrating the publisher's 25th anniversary.
Okay.
And it was trying to really build recognition for our authors, because many had been with the publisher since they started, and then also just the program in general. And so I created a partnership and campaign with the public library, the San Francisco Public Library, and it was a day-long event that we did that authors came. So lots of books were sold. We donated a lot of books. And then the other thing that we did that same year was, every year the library has like a summer reading program, and that's their biggest public outreach campaign of the year. And what I like crafted was, we would have one of our illustrators, a children's book illustrator, illustrate the summer reading collateral and poster and branding using art from a book that was coming out in the fall, and some original pieces of art. So it was like the illustrator used, some existing art and then some new art, but then got promoted everywhere, all over San Francisco. Bus shelters, tote bags, posters. It was amazing. And the program has still been happening.
Wow. Congratulations. And my last question for you, Stephanie. Given all the vast experience you have in marketing books, how do you see the future of book marketing in the next few years?
Good question. I think that book marketing is it's going to evolve, where the author is still going to have to do a lot, and the author is going to have to kind of be really savvy, because I think that also publishing kind of goes in waves, right? Like during COVID, it went really up because people were home, people were reading. But then I think it's definitely in the US taking like a tiny dip, right? And I think that for authors who really want longevity and to build their brand, right, they have the opportunity to kind of like take more control of the marketing. They can, decide more. I think it's really going to be author driven, because also publishers are weighing so many different priorities at once, right? They have so many titles, and it's kind of, figuring out allocating the resources, the time and the money. So the people that kind of like rise to the top, who have good ideas, who are executing a plan, those are the ones I think that are going to get a little bit more resources, because publishers can see and tell that you're also doing the work for yourself, right? Like you're helping yourself. So they want to help you.
Very well said. Stephanie, on that note, this amazing conversation about marketing books. Thank you so much for speaking to me. I think I learned many new things from you today. I think the most important message that you've given to all our viewers and listeners, and many of them are either authors or aspiring authors, get involved in marketing yourself.
Yes.
Thank you so much for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.